My name is David Ulbrich, and this is September 7th, 2007. What is your full name, sir?
John Joseph Maurer, Maurer.
And when and where were you born, sir?
Kenosha, Wisconsin, July 11th, 1922.
And which squadron were you in?
512th of the 376 Bomb Group.
Before you joined the military, what was life like in the United States during the Depression and the early war years?
Depression was very tough. I came from Kenosha, a community that had about 25% unemployment. So it was a rough existence. As kids, we worked on the farm to get enough money to, if we wanted to spend any money, we had to get our own money. But other than that, it very mild in terms of personal relationships. People were very friendly. People did a lot of things at home. Pianos and things were the excitement. No television in those days. We didn't have a telephone. And so it was a Spartan life compared to what we have today, but it was a delightful life. I had a wonderful childhood.
Did you think that those experiences toughened you for the later war effort?
Absolutely. I was one of 7, 5 boys, by the way. All 5 went into the service. And being the 5th in the family, you get pretty well toughened up by older brothers and sisters.
I can understand that. Where were you or what were you doing? Do you remember where you were, what you were doing when you heard about the Pearl Harbor attack?
Yes, I was working at Walgreens drugstore as a drug clerk. I was dusting off the radios in the radio area, and I heard of this, and I thought, oh my God in heaven. I was fairly alert with what was happening in the world, and I thought, my God, I'll have to get into that. There's no question about it.
Sure, sure. And did you volunteer or were you drafted?
Volunteered.
Why?
I wanted a commission. As a young man, I wanted to get to be an officer. That was the easiest way for me to get to be an officer.
And what drew you to the Army Air Force? Or I guess it may have been the Army Air Corps at that point.
Yes, it was the Army Air Corps. I had a friend by the name of Arthur Camosi, good friend, 3 years older than I was, had joined the CPT, Civilian Pilot Training, and I went for a ride with him one day. And I enjoyed the ride, and I thought he was going into the Air Corps, and I thought that would be an excellent place for me as well.
And then once you joined, what was your training like? Where did you go for your training?
Well, first of all, in order to enlist, you have to go up to Milwaukee, and they had a battery of tests you go through. And my father was not happy with the thought of me going into the Air Force to start with, the Air Corps at the time. And so I did go anyway, took the test, passed. They walked it into the next room and held up your hand, and now you were sworn in as an aviation cadet. So when I went home, I had to tell them that I already was enlisted and I was going to be in the Army Air Corps.
One of the things I've read about the training, especially pilot training, once you started in with your instructors and you did your solo missions and worked with crews and everything, was actually kind of dangerous. There were a lot of accidents. Did you have any close calls, or did you know of some of the accidents?
We don't even recall those.
We don't even
pointedly.
Recall.
But the point is, I do remember the general at the time giving a speech to those in the pilot program. We were classified at Aviation Cadet Center, and I was classified for pilot training. And he said, look on each side of you. The man next to you won't be there. And I felt sorry for those guys right that day, because I felt surely that I was going to make it, and I didn't know about anyone else. Yeah.
Well, I think as a pilot, you kind of have to develop that attitude, that self-confidence.
You have to. If you don't, you won't make it. You have to be absolutely convinced you can do it, or you will not do it.
So when you were going through the training, what was the toughest part of the pilot training?
Well, I don't recall anything really being that tough. The ground schools were great. In fact, I'm still proud of the quality of education we received in the Air Force. And while it was limited because of cost and everything else, it was excellent training, and it served me well, since I turned out to be an airline pilot, by the way, after the war. So I can tell you that the basic ground school and the basic flight trainings were excellent. Yeah.
The and about what year was this when you
I went in
enlisted?
42, I was in training in 43, 44. Yeah.
In terms of the B-24, did you find that to be a good aircraft? I'll give you an example. I was reading in one book, I believe it was Ambrose's book on McGovern's outfit, and in that book, one of the pilots said flying the B-24 was like driving a Mack truck.
No, that's quite true. I've never driven a Mack truck,
All right.
but I could assume that that was what it was. It was an extremely heavy airplane to handle. In other words, the controls were cumbersome, and you had to sometimes lift your butt right off the seat when you're pushing the rudder pedals in order to hold direction.
So you didn't have power steering back then.
No, no way.
Did you have an opportunity to fly other aircraft, for example, a B-17, or can you compare or contrast?
No, I did fly the B-17 only after the war in Europe was over, and we got our 4 hours per month flying time so that we could maintain our flying status. And I flew it. It was a much easier airplane to fly. Very well engineered airplane. Please, no knock on the B-24. I thought it was a great airplane, tough and rugged all the way through.
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely. As you were readying to take off, what was the process for readying your ship for flight? Can you maybe walk me through the kind of the checklist?
First of all, we'd have our briefing. We'd get back to the airplane, everybody get on the airplane, and there would be a signal to start engines. We did. And we would taxi out in line, and let's say there were 12 ships in your particular formation, and you had to be identified in position, so the position you were flying in the formation. But I do remember that the runways were steel matted runways, but the dust was unbelievable. And when you took off, every 20 seconds, one on each side of the runway, that by the time that guy got down 20 seconds, he was throwing so much dust you couldn't see them. And I've often commented that if one of them happened to crash at the end of the runway, we would have never seen it at the start of the runway. So it was just a matter of, you knew it was clear, and so you went. Another thing about that was, I remember one time we had a cylinder head temperature go out, and there was always an engineering officer at the end, so we opened the bomb bay doors, he stuck his head up, and I said, we lost our cylinder head temperature. He said, don't worry about it, you won't need it. So it was a matter, if you were on that line ready to go, you went. That's all there was to it.
I guess with the dust down at the end of the runway, that's another thing of self-confidence. You're just going to drive on through, fly
That's
on
exactly
through.
it. You had a mission to do, and that's all you had in mind. Complete your mission.
As a pilot, what were your biggest challenges during a mission? What were the biggest challenges? Were you most worried about flak or fighters or
Now,
the
let me
weather?
say this. In terms of the people on board, I had utmost faith in them. We had a great crew, and I knew they would each do their job without question. They were just hoping I did mine as well. But I don't recall any particular worrisome moments in that. And we would, as we went up there, we would loosen up the formation when we were flying out over the Adriatic, gaining altitude. And then once we got to altitude, closing in on the target area, we would go in real tight formation. What we did do was the gunners, while they were in loose formation, would clear their guns so that they knew everything was working. And one other thing I might add, we were in heated flying suits, as you know. And as a consequence, we carried one extra set of clothes for anyone who might lose a pants or might lose an arm sleeve or something. And so if that was gone, we still went. There was no question. Once you started up there, you were going. No turning back. But other than that, no, the route to and from was pretty mundane. Not that exciting, other than making sure you flew formation, which is always exciting.
Yeah, what was the toughest position in a box to fly, for example?
Well, I'll tell you what, the left wing, flying off the left wing, if you're the captain of the airplane, you have to fly what we call cross cockpit. And so naturally, the captain has the most experience. When the going gets tough, he has to fly. So he's flying cross cockpit, while the other guy on the right wing is flying right off his cockpit window. It's easy to do. And I remember once I was assigned a new co-pilot going up, and I happened to get moved over to the left wing because of change in formation. And I flew cross cockpit the whole day because the young man I had with me was not experienced enough to hold position. And if you don't hold position in a formation, the guy behind you will let you know about it real quick. And so there's a lot of get it up there, keep it up there, don't get loose, you know. And so as a consequence, I remember coming back from that mission, sitting down in the shed where we had our parachutes, and I fell asleep right in that shed. I was absolutely out. But that's flying a cross cockpit formation is very, very difficult. Yeah.
I guess that's like flying on the left or driving on the left side of the street, sort
Yeah.
of.
Well, what you're doing, instead of looking forward, you're looking sideways all day, and you have to keep looking. You don't look back and check and then come back again. There's no way to do that. No room to do that.
What would happen if one of your engines malfunctioned or caught fire? How would you handle that?
Well, we did not have fire extinguishers on the aircraft, so it was just a bailout procedure. Our emergency procedures basically were bailout, and that's pretty much the likes of it. However, if you lost an engine, which we did on the third mission I was on, and we had at 28 or 26,000, you cannot hold altitude on 3 engines with that airplane. So you gradually slow down, drop out of your own formation. And so they're all going over you, and you're dropping back all the time. So you try to get out from underneath the pack itself and drop wherever you can. But you have to start down, and you might hold altitude about 10,000, but not much before that. And so with 3 engines, you're not a very agile airplane. I remember on my third mission, we came back, and I remember coming back over Yugoslavia, and we were alone. A P-38 we'd called for fighter protection. The P-38 was circling us, and I remember looking down and saying, "What's that city below us with all those red and thatched strips there?" And somebody said, "That's Zagreb." Well, it was controlled by the Germans at the time, and they could have shot us down with pea shooters then at that altitude. Nobody touched us, thank God, and we got back to base okay. When we got back, we found out why one of the problems we had, the flak that we had run through actually had broken the tie on the gear handle that we had, broke that. And I understand from my bombardier today that it also fractured the oxygen line for the top turret gunner. So as a consequence, we couldn't get the nose gear down. We landed eventually without a nose gear and scraped along on the nose, and no one was hurt or anything, but it was just a case of kind of an exciting moment.
Landing? Oh, yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Did you worry when we were actually flying your combat missions? What years? By the time?
45.
45.
Yeah.
So at that point, you were probably less worried about fighters than flak.
Flak was our biggest enemy. Absolutely, no
Unless you were
question about it.
straggling. If you're straggling, then a fighter might jump you.
Well, they will. That's exactly what they were looking for. If you straggle, they normally get you. But flak was so much. But they concentrated the flak, and you have to realize we were running out of targets at the end of the war. Munich, Linz, and Vienna were the main targets we flew to. And they had railroad flak. What they would do, the railroad line between them would load the 88 millimeters on flatbed cars on the track and run them back and forth between the cities. And after briefing, we would know where we were going. Naturally, they'd say Linz or Vienna or Munich. And on the way up, you could hear Axis Al telling you, "We know you're coming to Vienna, we know you're coming to Linz, or we know you're coming to Munich today." So they knew where we were coming every day. And they just lined the flak up on the railroad lines, and 1,000 guns at the target was not unheard of at all.
And then they'd sight them in on the altitude, create a box of shrapnel for you to fly.
The Germans had taken over a couple of our B-24s. We knew that, and they would fly up to formation and judge the height, get the height. And I remember once in particular where one of them was coming up in my tail turret gunner called and said, we got a stranger coming into our formation, and didn't have the markings. He didn't have the code of the day either. Every airplane has a code of the day you can flash to somebody if they're in doubt about you. And so he flew right into the back of our formation, and I said, well, keep your guns right on his cockpit. Don't, if he looks menacing, knock him out. And when he did that, the guy backed out and slipped down out of our formation. So yeah, they would check our altitudes, no question about that, prior to the target, so they could let them know what altitude to set their fuses at for the 88 millimeters.
Because then a few, maybe 30 minutes or so from the target, you get your IP, and then you start flying level and,
Yeah.
and
Well, you're
straight.
level pretty much the last half hour or so of your flight, maybe last hour. But the point is that the IP, you circle around to get to the IP, and then the initial point, then you go into the target. Now, that might be 10 miles away or 8 miles away, whatever it might be. But it's interesting. We'd look around, and here would be a black cloud in the sky. You say, boy, are they getting it over there? And we'd be looking around, all of a sudden we'd be aiming right at that black cloud. Well, what it really was the spent 88 millimeters being shot up over at everybody that went before us. And so it was nothing more than the smoke from the shells that was making the cloud, and we'd have to go right to it.
So what was if there was a milk run, what was the easiest milk run that you had? If you could
Northern Italy generally would be the easiest milk run. They had flak, but we didn't encounter any fighters or anything, and it was a shorter trip. Most of our trips were anywhere from 6.5 to 8 hours.
one way or there and back?
Well, all the way, in and back, in and out. Some went 9 hours, but the point is the ones up to Northern Italy were rather easy because it was easy to get there, and they did not have the concentration of fighters there, and it was just the flak on the ground, and sometimes that wasn't as intense. But those were, if there were milk runs, that would be it, yeah.
What about the 2 or 3 toughest targets? You said Vienna, Vienna, Munich.
Munich, Linz, and Vienna were the toughest because they had the guns there in multiple numbers, and as a consequence, you didn't go through there without knowing full well that it was a dangerous place to be.
And what were the specific targets in
Railroad yards, marshalling yards, basically. Sometimes we'd have to go after a bridge, but it was basically the railroad yards. They wanted to stop the fuel from being transported around the country.
So a railroad yard is what, a railroad hub, essentially?
The railroad hub, yeah. Marshalling yards are the railroad hub, yeah.
So you could gum up the whole works for a few days by taking out that
That's
crossroads.
exactly what we did. And, it's amazing. We had so many airplanes at the time that I was telling my son yesterday that when you went over, we'd go up, let's say 4:30, we'd brief early, get up there early and go back, maybe 2 in the afternoon, and there would be still formations going up there. I said one time you felt you could almost walk on the wingtips from Austria back to Italy. But we actually beat them with sheer numbers. We muscled them to death. There was no question about it.
Yes, I agree. If you don't mind sharing, what was your closest call, and what was the I guess the worst moment in one of those combat missions?
Well, actually, it's when you have to land without a nose gear. That gets a little exciting. And
You can go,
please understand, our experience level was nil in that area. And so as a consequence, everything was brand new. But I think probably what I mentioned last night to my bombardier, Walter Jugler, that the time that the war was over. And the generals decided that they wanted a flyover. And the whole group was up. And all over the Port of Barry on that area. And my God in heaven, we were starting to run into each other, and everybody was peeling off and getting out of the way. It was a real horrible scene, and why it was done, I guess, only because to gratify somebody, but it was wrong to be done, and it was a very, very dangerous day, and the war was over. That's what bothered me so much, I guess.
You don't. That's not the time to be taking chances.
No.
It's sometimes said might be a tough question. It might not be a tough question, but it sometimes says that there's no atheists in foxholes. And I was wondering if you would mind sharing to what degree your combat experience, if at all, if it did at all, affected your religious faith.
No, it strengthened it. Frankly, I tried to be a very religious person when I was there, and still do try. But the point is, no, I was very, very much involved with my church, and we had mass quite frequently, and it strengthened my faith, if anything. And I can also say there are no atheists in the cockpit either. You better believe in something when you're up there, because if you don't, it's a pretty lonely world.
In terms of you mentioned your outstanding crew. Did you feel like a family or a band of brothers when you were together?
We were, but without question, they were not only my crew, they were my dear friends. And I felt that of each one of them. Some a little more, but the officers were really, really close. We played everything together. We played cards day after day after day. And I was happy to say that I won more games from Walter Jugler than he won from me. But he won't buy into that necessarily.
In terms of your camaraderie there with your crew, your pilot, your co-pilot, your bombardier, your navigator would have been officers.
Yes.
And then the rest would have
been...
been...
6 enlisted men.
Yeah, enlisted men. But from what I've read about the flight crews that were close, yes, you were officers and enlisted, but that didn't matter that much.
Didn't make any difference to us. We were buddies, the whole bunch. That's why we have tried to find the crew members also to come to these conventions, but you just can't locate them.
Well, it's tough. It's a long time ago, too.
Yeah.
In terms of being back on base when you weren't flying, because I've seen some of the flight logs or the lists of missions. You could be flying 3, 4, 5 days in a row if that's what it was.
Yeah.
What did you do for fun or recreation when you were on?
Baseball. We were everybody there was sports minded, and we did an awful lot of softball, an awful lot. Every time we had a chance, we'd be out playing ball.
So is it your crew versus another crew, or the different squadrons?
No, it'd be the officers generally versus the enlisted men.
All right.
And that's the way it would work out. They generally were the better ball players, I might add. No, it was a family affair. Rank didn't play a part in it at all. Naturally, everybody respected whatever the rank was, but there was no, I'm big and you're small, or you're big and I'm small, and none of that.
So the discipline was.
I'm hearing that squeak really loud with his foot. I think it's hitting the bottom of the table.
Your foot is hitting the bottom of the table.
Okay.
Your foot.
The left foot. If you can there you go. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. No problem.
I'm screwing up the machine.
It was just really loud. It was,
Okay.
All right. All right. Yeah, we were talking about softball. So discipline and regulations were not too strict when you were on the ground.
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, we were pretty much your own boss. Do what you want to do. Nobody was demanding anything out of you other than be prepared the next day for flight if you were on. You could not be in the officers' club that night, the night before your trip. That was a no-no. You just weren't allowed in there.
Well, that's completely understandable.
Yeah.
And
that was adhered to by everyone. I've never seen or heard of a situation where it was violated.
in the Army, they would have officers who were rule happy. They'd call them chicken shit and that sort of thing. But it doesn't sound like you had that sort of problem.
Never had that problem in the Air Force. The only thing that I remember about the Air Force, we would go to an officers' club in the States and they say Air Force officers must be accompanied by their parents. So that's what they thought of the Air Corps boys.
On your missions, were you ever close to calling bailout, punching the button or whatever, the bailout button?
No, never close at all. No, never deciding should I or shouldn't I. No, we were very fortunate in that sense. Other than the one time when we came back with the alone and with the gear not operating, That was the only malfunction, the aircraft, basically. Yeah.
That must have been landing with no nose gear. That's what it was called, nose gear.
That's right.
That must have been
Yeah.
quite.
Well,
quite,
when the nose hits the metal lattice work on the runway and starts scraping, you feel like it's going to take your feet right with it. It's your feet are right on the edge there. So it is exciting, and I remember jumping out of the top of the aircraft after we came to a stop, and the gunners were going out of the back end. The back end was elevated, so we had a pretty good drop. But it went very well. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got hurt in any way.
How did you find your grounds crew? Did they?
Fine. Yeah, we had good relationships with them. In fact, one of the head mechanics of one of the airplanes we flew was right from Wisconsin, up in northern part of Wisconsin, and they really took care of their airplane. No question about it.
I understand there was.
It was like their baby, and they took care of their baby. Each one was assigned to it, and I give them great credit. They did an outstanding job.
Yeah, I had interviewed some other
Yeah.
grounds crewmen, and they'd work all night. And
They
there'd be basically five men per plane, and
Yeah.
they'd switch out engines.
Oh,
and-
they'd have those hard stands up there, boy, on that wing, on that engine, no question about it.
And then I guess they would wait on the tarmac on the flight line, waiting for you guys to come back.
They
counting
absolutely
the planes.
would. They were just like a home pigeon coming back. They have to be ready to grab them when they land. And no, I have nothing but compliments for them. They are great people and did a great job for us.
Well, that's great to hear because some of them are kind of feel like they're a little bit behind the scenes because they weren't the flyboys.
The only time I don't even have a complaint, but something that I was a little upset at the time, I went out to what we call slow time an engine. If you put a new engine on, you have to run it so many hours. So when you're not flying, they ask you, can you help us out and take an airplane up and slow time the engine for them? Well, what they didn't do that day, they didn't put the extra boost in on the turbos, and we didn't have turbos to use, and I missed them going down the takeoff. So I said, don't do that again. Make sure they get turbos in there as well.
Sure. In terms of communications with home, did you write very many letters, or did you receive very many letters?
I received a letter every day. My mother wrote every day. I didn't receive one every day. Sometimes you get 5 or 6, but she wrote a letter every day. Yeah.
And you probably didn't have that much time to write back.
Oh, I at least once or twice a week.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really? And what sort of things did you talk about in those letters? What did she tell you? What did you
It
tell
was
her?
one page. Hi, Mom and Dad. How's everything going? Everything's going fine here. We're having a great time. Pretty soon we'll be coming back home. That's all. That's all it would be. I could stereotype those kind of letters. That's exactly what they were. And Mom and Dad would write back, everything's fine. We're almost the same kind of letter. That everything's going well, everybody's feeling well, and it was.
The leaves are pretty in the fall.
That's
and that
right.
sort of
Just
thing.
helping everybody keep their spirits up. That's what it was.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I've read some of these letters myself, and they seem very mundane.
Yeah.
But the mundaneness is what is so
Identifies
important.
something. It advised you want to make sure you don't put any added pressure on anybody, and that's exactly what it was. Yeah.
That's right. Well, I had talked with some of your fellow veterans here, and not many of them were getting that many letters.
Yeah.
Really, for whatever reason, and they were busy and so on. But you're one of the exceptions because
Yeah,
you get a lot of letters.
I could never complain about not getting letters because once we stayed at a base for any time, the letters would come. I'd get them, no question about it. And I really kept abreast of what was happening at home, and Mother made sure of that. Yeah.
And so, when did you finish your last mission?
I can't tell you exactly, but
All
it was right at the end of the war, May something in 45. And then we flew back. Our crew came all the way back. That was one of the exciting trips.
Flying over the ocean?
Flying all the way. We went from Foggia area over to Marrakesh, which is in Morocco. and then down to Dakar, Africa, which is Senegal, it would call Dakar, Africa now, then across the pond over to Natal, Brazil, and then up to British Guiana, into Puerto Rico and Savannah, Georgia. I remember one particular time at Natal, the gradient on the runway went up in the center and down on the other end, and I remember taking off early in the morning, it was dark out, and took off, started down over the ocean, and aimed over the ocean, and I thought, my God, we don't have enough runway here, and the gradient was so steep that you couldn't see the last 2/3 of the runway, and I was ready to pull the power on it, and all of a sudden we came over the hill, and now we're downhill and had plenty of runway. But the thought that got to me at that point was, hey, what the hell's going wrong here? And then we flew up we flew up to British Guiana, and that's where the Jones Massacre was at, And that was a rainy day. Now, we were instrument rated, and as a consequence, we didn't fly much instrument, I can tell you that. It was all visual flying. And so landing at a 500-foot ceiling in a rainy day, in a runway cut out of the jungle, which it really was, and coming in there, that was quite exciting for an experience level that I was at, some 700 hours or 800 hours. And as a career pilot, I could tell you this much. I always often say you either can be good or lucky. It's better to be lucky, and that's exactly, I felt very much a part of that.
So then you arrived in Savannah, Georgia, and did you end up staying in the military thereafter, or when did you separate?
I got out as soon as I could. When I landed in Savannah, Georgia, my brother was based in Savannah, so I had a chance to go visit him and go out to dinner with him that night. But from there, we had R&R at that time. So I got on an airplane, the Naval Air Transport at that time, and flew up to New York to get a free ride to New York and a free ride to Chicago, which is outside of Kenosha. And the B-25 from the military had been ran into the Empire State Building at that time. And I wanted to see it because the back end was still sticking out, so I did. I went up and looked at it, and so that's why I had to get back to Floyd Bennett Field to get my Naval Air Transport free ride over to Chicago. And I got in the subway system and got lost in the subway system and ended up in the middle of Harlem. And so I went over and I said to one of the store owners there, I said, ma'am, could you call a cab for me? And she said, no cabs will come here. So she said, the bus line is out there. It was about 3 miles that I had to get to, and it was a rainy night, and it was dark, and it was scary, and I think I ran probably the best 3 miles anybody ever ran. If they could have clocked me, I think I'd have had a record. Sure. But I made it, yeah.
And then what did you do after the war? Did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
Yes, I did. I went to Marquette University for 4 years. I wanted to be a pilot. I knew that. And in order to be a pilot, you had to have 2 years of college in. And at the end of 2 years, nobody was hiring. It was a very down period. If people remember, a lot of crashes, and the airline industry did not grow at all between 45 and 50. Just did not grow at all. In fact, it was receding. And as a consequence, I was hired in 50. When they first started, I was one of the early people to get hired. And so I spent a career on the airline. Yeah.
Something just occurred to me. I want to turn back to clock and time a little bit to your very early in your Army Air Corps career. Was it the Army Air Force then, or was it the
Army Air Corps?
Army Air Corps. That's right. Army Air Corps career. Did you have an opportunity to go bombers or fighters, or did they just send you one?
Yes, they did. You have your pick. I picked bombers. I wanted to fly the biggest thing they had. As a matter of fact, as a young B-24 airplane commander, I wrote the commanding general when the B-32 was being built. That was a consolidated airplane, just as the same as the 24 was. If I could not transfer to the new squadron, the B-32s, Well, he must have looked at my application and said, learn how to fly the 24 before you talk about anything else. But anyway, yeah, I wanted to fly the biggest thing flying, and that's exactly what it was. 24 was the biggest at that time.
Yeah, until the
Yes.
B-29 came out.
Well, yes, but not at the time that I was flying.
Sure, sure.
Asking for those improvements. But no, and the B-29 turned out to be a big airplane, no question about it. But the B-32 was even bigger, and that was exactly where I wanted to be. But no, I wanted bombers. I also thought of a commercial airline flying. The larger airplane I flew, the better my background would be. So
Certainly, the B-24 is a large aircraft.
it is. Interestingly enough, in 1995, I was the airport manager of Kenosha Airport, and a B-25 was traveling through that area and going from Janesville to Kenosha. So I went over to Janesville, called them, and they said, yes, you could come and fly with us back from Janesville to Kenosha Airport. And they let me fly co-pilot for them. And I never realized how noisy that airplane was. God, the noise was deafening. After being 35 years in the airline with a very quiet cockpits, it just amazed me how noisy they were, and what a bucket of bolts it really was. But it certainly held up, no question about it.
Very good, very good. This is one of the questions I ask everyone, all the veterans, whether they were airmen or Marines or soldiers or sailors. In this, in this modern age we have, in this contemporary era in 2007, the word hero is thrown around a lot. Sports heroes, this heroes, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself to be a hero for what you did?
Absolutely not. That's almost ridiculous, really. And I mean it seriously. We did our job. We did our duty. You want to know what heroes are? Those kids right over in Iraq today. I think we've got the best military we've ever had. I'm so proud of those kids, I can't tell you. And if you want to talk about heroes, some of those kids are heroes going where they're going today. No, I'll tell you this much. And I speak for my generation pretty well, I think we were very fortunate that it went as well as it did. It was tough, no question about it. The kids on the ground were really hurt. One thing about aviation is we went back home at night to a dry cot. We didn't have to live out in the mud, and that was a blessing for the Air Corps.
It's very interesting you say some of those things. First of all, your answer about, no, we weren't heroes, we were doing our job, we were serving our country, we were just trying to survive, lived one day. That's what virtually everyone I've heard from your generation.
No,
all the
I've
veterans.
never heard of a World War II veteran tell me he was a hero,
Yeah.
or imply that he was a hero.
No, definitely not.
No.
And if you were in at that time and someone wanted to be a hero, you wanted to get the next county away because he'd probably get you killed
Yeah.
in trying to become a hero. Short lifespan.
All you wanted to do is be as efficient as you could be, and we all tried to do that. Every one of us, everyone in our crew tried to do that. I know that much, but nobody could tell me that they were a hero.
What's interesting about your other comment, though, is I've been doing a lot of interviews with 1st Infantry Division veterans. These are Omaha Beach guys. And, in order to try to build a little trust and kind of reach out to them, I mentioned that my father is a World War II veteran, 376 Bomb Group, did some of the later Ploeshti runs. And so, and their eyes get really, really big, and they're like, I would never wanted to have been on one of those airplanes flying through the flak dealing with fighters. Yeah. So, it's very interesting to me that the aviators, the aviation people said they wouldn't want to be on the ground in a foxhole, and the ground pounders wouldn't want to be where you were either.
That's right.
And the sailors didn't want to be in either place.
I'll tell you where a hero is. I had a brother who was on an LCI on D-Day, and going into D-Day, and one of his missions after the war was to go back and pick up the dead in the Channel and take them back to England. And they had so many dead over there that they couldn't keep them, so they took them back out to sea and took the dog tags off and deep sixed them. So that's a hero. How anyone could do that, I can't imagine.
Is there, we're coming to the end here. Is there anything you'd like to add, or this is your sort of open forum for a few minutes if I've missed something that you really wanted to talk about?
Well, let me start by saying I'm grateful to Ball State for allowing this to happen. I have 3 great nephews, and their names are Noah and Levi Maurer and Johnny Walls. And I want to get a copy of this for each one of them so that they'll know their grandpa where he was and everything else. And thank you for the opportunity. I truly appreciate that. And I've been wanting to do that, as your magazine said. You want to do it, but you never get it done. This gave me the opportunity, and I'm extremely grateful for it.
Well, I thank you for your time and,
Yeah.
and your great stories too, and your also the facts that you told us, the facts about flying. That's very important to get that feel, that color feel of what was going on.
Well, the truth of the matter is, when you're that age and that charged up about getting something done, nothing seems impossible to you at that time. I think back now after a career of 27,000 hours of flying, when I think of the level I was at the 700 hour, and I say to myself, wow, you have to be lucky rather than be good. Because while the training was profound at that level at that time, nobody can make a substitution for experience. And you find that out as you get a little older. And you have to be lucky and to get through some of the things we had to get through. And that's not me. Everybody that flew at that time is subject to that. So thank God for the military. They did a great job of training us to complete what we have done with the limited training we had and the background we had was amazing. Just amazing. So they knew what they were doing, and I'm grateful for that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.